All right, everyone. Good morning. My name is Lana Burgess, and I'm the faculty curator at McKissick Museum at the University of South Carolina. It is my great pleasure to have you with us today for our inaugural event as part of the Justice-themed semester, sponsored by the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of South Carolina. This event and others coming up are sponsored by a grant. It's a co-curricular grant that comes out of the Dean's Initiative money. So I'd like to thank Lacey Ford, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and Cynthia Davis, Associate Dean, who has spearheaded this Justice-themed semester initiative. It's our first one, and we look forward to participating in future years by offering co-curricular programs and events just like this one. I also have to thank the College of Arts and Sciences marketing team and the tech team for providing this platform through Zoom today and working so hard to help us reach out to our community on campus and across campus through McKissick Museum programs. Today, I have the great pleasure of introducing Jill Found, who is a PhD candidate in the history department at the University of South Carolina. Ideally, this was going to be a live presentation, and Jill recently took a job to go back and teach high school in Virginia while continuing her dissertation work. So we will watch a short recording, and in the meantime, I will put in the chat her email address. If you have any questions, she would love to continue the dialogue and is very sorry she can't be here, but I hope you'll still find that what she has to say sheds a light on the history of women and men, but also women, at the University of South Carolina when it was South Carolina College, when it was founded and worked by enslaved people who were either owned by the college in the case of some of the men, or perhaps they were rented to the college. Before we do that, this is also a part of programming for our current exhibition, which is called A Woman's Right, and it looks at the history of women at the University of South Carolina from 1801 to the present day. Because McKissick Museum is closed to the public, for your own enjoyment, we have a PDF downloadable version of part 1 and an online digital exhibit, which I'll also link to in the chat for you to view and study at your leisure after this presentation is over. The exhibition would not have been accomplished and be as terrific as it is, I am biased, without the help and support of our guest curator, Jennifer Gunter, Dr. Jennifer Gunter, who is with the College of Arts and Sciences Collaborative on Race and Reconciliation, and her curatorial assistant, Hannah McGraw, who is a senior in the South Carolina Honors College this semester, graduating in December. And it was all started by Kate Crosby, the former curator of exhibitions at McKissick Museum. So thank you to all of you who have brought this to fruition. Thank you all of you who have joined us today, and I'll get the presentation started.
Hi everyone, my name is Jill Found. I'm a graduate student in history at the University of South Carolina, and today I'm going to talk to you about enslaved women at South Carolina College. This is part of a larger body of research that looks at enslaved people on college campuses, or enslaved people in cities, kind of more generally, especially the work I've been doing looking at South Carolina College, which is what the University of South Carolina was called before the Civil War, and the city of Columbia. So I need to start with a bit of a disclaimer, and that's that we don't really know a lot about the experiences of women at South Carolina College, at least not enslaved women. There's a lot of reasons for this, and the biggest one is archival. There aren't a lot of records in the college archives that talk about enslaved women, and there are sort of even fewer that talk about enslaved women in any detail, aside from the kind of work they did, really. So we'll talk kind of briefly about slavery at South Carolina College generally, for men and women, and what that was like. And then we'll talk kind of specifically about how the experiences of women were different, and I'll offer some suggestions as to how they might have been different, But again, this research is really uh, not fully fleshed out because of the archive. So I'm going to tell you what I know and what I can assume, but that doesn't mean that that's a complete picture of slavery of the lives of enslaved women on South Carolina College. We'll end by talking about an enslaved woman, really an enslaved family, and their experiences at the end of slavery on the campus of South Carolina College and how things changed. So I usually start my presentations with this picture, and that's because this is an image of South Carolina College, as you can probably tell. But it's also it's one of the earliest images we have of South Carolina College. It's also the first image we have of an African American on the campus, or near the campus at least. So you can see in the far side from me, in the bottom corner, there is an African American man who's carrying a cane. He's wearing a blue coat, white grayish pants. And I always like this image, not just because it gives us a picture of an African American on the college campus around 1820, but also because this man is doing something that 30 years later in South Carolina could have earned him, or could have resulted in him being given up to 50 lashes, so whipped. And that's that he's carrying a cane, right? A cane was a symbol of gentility, masculinity, and something that the powers that be in South Carolina, the white elites, often tried to prevent African Americans from having any access to at all. So we see in this image an African American man kind of challenging the rules set by South Carolina society, right? The abilities of men and women to do that within slavery, or even African American men and women who were free, would have looked pretty different. But let's talk first about South Carolina College, about how this came to be. So in the early 19th century, so the early 1800s, the state of South Carolina decided that it needed a public college. That public college would be the first in the state, and they really modeled it after northern colleges. Places like Princeton especially came up in their discussions, but they talked to other universities that were starting to be founded lower south as well, further south as well. And they decided that the trustees of the college, who were again all elite white men, decided to center the college in Columbia. So this is an early map of Columbia. And when the college was founded in 1801, the city of Columbia was still pretty new. It had been laid out on this grid system, and plots had been sold, including plots specified for the college, but it was really still a growing town, and the town and the college grow up together. And they both share a reliance on the labor of enslaved people. So on the campus of South Carolina College, enslaved men and women did all kinds of work. Enslaved men and women cleaned the dormitories. They very likely were the ones who built the dormitories and other campus buildings. They cooked meals, they served meals, they did things like clean the wells, wash buildings, paint buildings, anything that needed to be done, chop wood, set fires in rooms, anything that needed to be done in 19th century life was very often done by these enslaved people. And the way that the work was divided doesn't seem as clear as we might expect it to be. It wasn't like only women were doing what we'd think of as domestic work, so cooking, cleaning. A lot of men were actually doing that kind of domestic work. And that's in part because there aren't a great deal of women on South Carolina College's campus. And I'll talk in a little bit about why I think that might be. But I had mentioned the sort of research that I'm doing and how it fits into this larger picture. So at the university, they've begun to acknowledge the history of slavery. This is the text from one of the markers that is placed on the college campus. This is actually right in front of McKissick Museum. And then the second marker is near the president's house. And it's really the second marker I want to talk about. Because if you see here at the bottom, if I move out of the way, there's a list of the names of enslaved people. And it says Despite limited references to individuals, enslaved workers who appear by name in archival records include Abraham, Amanda, Anna, Anthony, Charles, Henry, Jack, Jim, Joe, Lucy, Mal, Peter, Sancho and his wife, Simon, Toby, and Tom. Right? Most of those names are pretty clearly men's names, but these aren't all the names in the university archival records. I've found at least double that number, including April, Caesar, Edward, Ike, Frank, Harriet, Jack, Jane, Jim Blue, Jim Ruffin, those are two different men, Jesse, John, Paul, Phoebe, Sam, Titus, and Tom. So these are the names of people who appear in the records, but these aren't the only people enslaved on campus. We know that because someone like Titus, for example, is a really good example. Titus, who would take the last name Pinckney after the Civil War, was owned by Maximilian Laborde. And Professor Laborde owned a number of enslaved people on campus. And men like Titus, he would sometimes hire out to the school, meaning that the school paid Maximilian Laborde for Titus's work. But other enslaved people owned by Laborde, like Titus's wife, Lucretia, we never see hired out to the college. But we can assume that she was on campus doing the work of an enslaved person. So, what was that work for enslaved women, and what did it look like? Well, like I said, it was honestly very often similar to the work of enslaved men on the college campus. For example, a woman who appears repeatedly in the archival record is named April. And in the 1840s, the university hires her, meaning they pay her owner, or the person who purported to own April, for April's labor. And the work she's doing includes things like cleaning, but it also includes planting trees. And other kinds of work that you might expect to be more sort of manual labor work that might be reserved for men, we see men and women both doing. So this kind of raises the question, why more men than women on campus? Or why did the university seem to prefer to hire men rather than enslaved women? In its history, I can't find an example of the university owning any enslaved women, though they certainly owned enslaved men. And this question is kind of like a big question mark hanging over this work. So I don't have solid answers. I don't have a letter from someone telling me why they're doing this. What I do have is knowledge of the university and some suggestions about why they might have done this. So the first is this. Young men in the 19th century who were coming to college, often as young as 15, 16, from the wealthiest families in South Carolina, were used to not just owning enslaved people, but being able to control enslaved people, sometimes violently, and for young men, often sexually. They sort of were legally and very often by custom allowed to commit sexual violence, such as rape, against enslaved women. And when the university was founded, they very clearly want to avoid anything that could cause kind of trouble on campus. So they forbid students from bringing their own enslaved people to campus in the same entry that they prohibit students from bringing guns, horses, and dogs onto campus. So those are things that people would use to start duels, like guns, right? Or they'd race and bet on, like horses and dogs. So I think enslaved people, the trustees of the college saw as a potential area of risk. And I think enslaved women would have faced double the risk, right? These students on this college campus aren't just elite young men, they're rowdy elite young men. They very frequently get in trouble for what are called riots by the college, so breaking windows, kind of, having loud screaming riots across the campus. And they also get in trouble for leaving campus and going to places that are essentially houses of ill repute or brothels. At least once there are students punished for that. So it's very possible that there aren't enslaved women on the college campus on purpose because the professors and trustees of the college preferred not to hire enslaved women to do this kind of work. It's also possible that the university, which mostly relied on the hiring system for its enslaved laborers, it's possible that there weren't as many women in the hiring system in Columbia, just sort of because of the city's dynamics. Women very likely wouldn't have been skilled workers in the city either, and the university certainly hires skilled workers, people like brick masons, to do work. So it's very possible that women weren't as needed on the campus, but it's also possible that the university chose not to have as many women on the campus. So we're not exactly sure why it is that we see so few women appear in the archives. And the archival references we do have to women, very rarely do we see the same women recurring on campus, meaning very rarely are the same women hired out again and again and again to campus. Some are women like April, but other women you only see appear once or so. But all this to say that there appears to be this absence of women on campus, but it's not entirely clear to me still how true this would be to what life was like actually on campus. And I say that because of the example I gave earlier. Titus and Lucretia Pinckney were an enslaved man and woman who were owned by Maximilian Laborde and lived on South Carolina College's campus. They had at least 4 children on campus with them, or during the time that they were enslaved, and it appears that all of these people lived on campus, right? So these are not enslaved, this is not an enslaved family owned by the college, but it is an enslaved family owned by the president or by a professor of the college, and it's an enslaved family that very likely lived on campus. So these kinds of stories are harder to access because it's not as clear cut that they were physically on campus, right? Archival records, despite what we might ask of them, don't always tell us where things happened, where people lived. So even if I know that Laborde owned 20 enslaved people and that Laborde lived on campus, that doesn't necessarily mean that all those 20 enslaved people lived on campus as well. However, I'm assuming Titus and Lucretia did for some very specific reasons, and I'll get to those. But let's talk about Titus and Lucretia and their family. So Lucretia is an enslaved woman, like I said, owned by Maximilian Laborde, and she lives with her husband and children on the campus of South Carolina College in the 1850s and 1860s, right? So this means that they live on this campus during a very tumultuous time, a time when the calls for secession are rising and rising and rising, especially on campus, and a time in South Carolina where laws regulating the movement, the actions, the behaviors of enslaved people are really being cracked down on. So for Titus and Lucretia, living on campus would have been probably a confusing place to live, definitely an exciting place, but not necessarily in a good way. And on campus, they have children, including at least 2 daughters named Susan and Matilda. Now, Susan and Matilda are really interesting, and I'm going to focus on Matilda. So Matilda is born in slavery, very likely on South Carolina College's campus, but she and her family don't leave campus after the end of the Civil War, or even seemingly during it. During the Civil War, we know that enslaved people were remaining on campus, very likely working in the hospital that was on campus, tending to other buildings, and it seems very possible to me that Titus, Lucretia, and their children stayed on campus. So that would mean that young Matilda Pinckney would see the dramatic changes that the Civil War brought about to her city, to her state, to her country, and she would become, as a young woman, free. This freedom came with it the opportunity for education. In South Carolina, after the Civil War, you see the creation of the first schools for African Americans, like the Howard School in Columbia, where Susan and Matilda very likely went to school. And you also see the opening of the University of the South Carolina College to African American boys. We know that one of Lucretia and Titus's children attended the preparatory school for the university, and it's also very likely that Matilda attended the normal school. So, this is an image of women at the normal school. A normal school was like a teacher training school, and this one was on the campus of South Carolina College. If you're familiar with campus, that's an image of graduates of the normal school and their principal sitting on the stairs of Rutledge College, which is where the normal school was housed. So women like Matilda gained an education at South Carolina College in the 1870s. And we don't think about this a lot. We're used to the idea of desegregation happening during the Civil Rights Movement, right? Very famously, South Carolina College, the first African American woman to attend is Henri Monteith. But there are women who were educated on the campus of South Carolina College, well before that, including women who were very likely born into slavery on that same campus. So I believe that Matilda Pinckney is one of these women pictured here, but I don't know exactly for sure which one she is or if she's even here. So, in trying to understand these stories of slavery on college campuses, it means confronting the knowledge that the archive doesn't answer a lot of the questions that we want to ask it, or at least it doesn't very clearly answer those questions about the lives of enslaved women. So, for much of this research, it means asking questions that go unanswered and trying to answer those questions as best we can, not just from South Carolina College, but looking at the experiences of enslaved people on other college campuses as well. So I hope you've learned something about slavery at South Carolina College today. I hope that you learned something about enslaved women at South Carolina College today. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. My email address is jillfound@gmail.com, just my first name, last name @gmail.com. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and I look forward to hearing from you soon, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Again, I want to thank Jill, and if you don't have any questions, I would encourage you to at least reach out to her via email and give her an appreciation, show her some appreciation and some love for the work that she's been doing. I want to thank you all for joining us for our brief Lunch and Learn. And again, if you are interested in any of the upcoming programs affiliated with the Justice Themed Semester, we have on October 20th, a professor from Northeastern University talking about Title IX and its impact on athletics at the University of South Carolina. We also will be having a Lunch and Learn with the Office of Multicultural Student Affairs, who will be talking to us about some of their programmatic offerings and some of the diversity and inclusion initiatives that they are working towards to provide a more inclusive campus for all of our students. And then in November, right after the election, we will be having Melissa Burnett, who is an alum of University of South Carolina Law School, and possibly still talking to Vicki Eislander on Monday to bring her in on board as well to talk about their experiences as female students in the late 1960s, early 1970s on campus. In other news, McKissick Museum, we rely on your support. So if you'd like this program or others that we provide, please think about joining the museum. Again, we are closed, but we are really ramping up our digital offerings and hope that you will consider a membership. I also want to give a shout out to the work that's being done by my colleagues on staff. Thank you to Amanda Blue for all of the PR and marketing support for our programs this year. And if you're interested, tomorrow, Jane Prisby, our executive director, will be hosting Quilt Documentation Day at 11 a.m. live on Facebook. We will also be having our Historic Southern Naturalists team who are working on our natural history collections, giving an update on their work next Thursday. And then, of course, Rudy Mankey, our very own naturalist in residence at the University of South Carolina, will be leading his fall talk on September 22nd, where he will be doing a Facebook Live at lunchtime on the historic horseshoe, walking around and looking at the specimens there. You cannot come to the horseshoe and join him, but you are welcome to participate through Facebook Live. So thank you again for all of your time and attention today. Thank you again to Jill and to the College of Arts and Sciences for supporting this Justice Semester event, and look forward to seeing you at the next event soon. Take care and have a great weekend.